Hi everyone, today in this lecture we are gonna talk about subjective poetry and its different kinds of it. Simply it means that we are gonna learn that what a subjective poetry is and why it is known as subjective poetry and what the characteristics of subjective poetry are. Well, let's start it. Subjective poetry. Subjective poetry can be defined as a genre of poetry that emphasizes the personal, individual, and subjective experiences, emotions, and thoughts of the poet. What does it mean by this definition? Simply, it means that a subjective poetry is nothing but just a kind of poetry in which a poet expresses his own feelings, experiences, innermost thoughts, and emotions. This point you need to keep in mind that it is nothing but it is just a kind of poetry in which a poet expresses his own feelings, experiences, innermost thoughts, and emotions. Right? Simply, it means that whenever you find any kind of poetry in which a poet has expressed his personal feelings and emotions, so then that poetry is said to be a subjective poetry, right? Don't worry, I'm gonna mention all that kinds of poetry which are listed in the list of subjective poetry. And subjective poetry includes elegy, ode, sonnet, and lyric. As you have understood subjective poetry, now it is the time to explain and learn its kinds. The first one is elegy. It refers to a poetic genre that mourns and laments the loss of someone or something. Basically, elegy is nothing but a kind of subjective poetry. The question is why it is called a subjective poetry. So the answer is because in this kind of poetry, a poet expresses his inner feelings about the loss of someone or something. Most people confine elegy to the death of people, but it is not only about the death of someone dear ones, right? But it can be also about the passing era, tragic events, and the loss of something, etc. But if someone asks this question that why an elegy is considered a subjective poetry, then you simply say that because this form of poetry emphasizes the personal emotions, thoughts, and experiences of the poet, right? In response to what? In response to someone or something, right? Okay, you can take the example of Whitman's elegy, that is, "O Captain, my Captain," right? Basically, in this elegy, he laments the death of President Abraham Lincoln. Ode. It refers to a poetic form that is characterized by its elevated style, as well as its expression of deep emotions or praise for a person, an event, or an object. What does it mean by this definition? Simply, it means that ode is nothing but just a kind of poem that has elevated style and it praises a person, an event, or an object. It is also a kind of subjective poetry because a poet expresses his feelings about a person, a place, or an event. You can take the example of Ode to Nightingale by John Keats because it addresses a nightingale with an elevated language and John Keats expresses his emotions. So these are the characteristics of an ode, right? There are many examples like this, like Ode to Skylark by Shelley, and so on. Sonnet. A sonnet is 14-line poem traditionally written in iambic pentameter that explores themes of love and beauty, etc. What does it mean? Simply, it means that a sonnet is a specific type of poem that consists of 14 lines, right? But the question is how a sonnet is a subjective poetry. The answer is because it focuses on personal experiences, emotions, and perspective of the poet, right? You can take the example of Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare. Basically, in this sonnet, he expresses his deep affection for a person. He compares that person to a summer's day. So this is a sonnet and he expresses his feelings about that individual. So a sonnet is considered to be a subjective poetry. Lyric. Lyric poetry is a genre of poetry that emphasizes the expression of personal emotions, thoughts, and perceptions of the poet. Basically, the term lyric originally referred to the poetry that was meant to be sung, right? And that is why it is considered to be a subjective poetry, because a poet expresses his own feelings, thoughts, and perceptions about the topic. So that is why it is also a subjective poetry. Well guys, if you have enjoyed this lecture, please do not forget like and subscription to my channel. And see you next time. Bye bye.